We are members of the 89th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, and we are about to see our first real combat here at Chickamauga. Our mission is to hold this line at all costs. What are we about to get ourselves into? Let's find out here on Horseshoe Ridge. So here we are in front of the 89th Volunteer Infantry Monument here on Horseshoe Ridge. Now let's offer a little bit of brief history of the 89th up until this point. They mustered into service on August 26th of 1862 at Camp Dennison. After 3 weeks of basic training, they were sent off to northern Kentucky to help defend against a Confederate advance. Their first commander, by the name of John Marshall, would be kicked out of the regiment for drunkenness. Their next commander, William Glenn, he would resign, and their third commander was removed for being pro-slavery, and his name was Joseph Hartfield. So, as you can see, the 89th had a bit of adversity shortly after mustering into the Union Army here. Now, they also went through a period where they were poorly equipped and supplied, so these men kind of had it tough mustering into the Union Army thus far. Now, on top of the commanding position being a revolving door for the 89th, the regiment was also hit with a poor supply train, and they were hit with illness before even seeing their first real combat. So prior to Gordon Granger's Reserve Corps arriving in this general area, there were no Union units in this position. The Union defense atop Snodgrass Hill ended with the 21st Ohio down in that direction. So just as the 21st Ohio was about to be enveloped, Gordon Granger's Reserve Corps and Whitaker's Brigade manning this area, containing the 89th Ohio, arrived just in the nick of time and immediately began forming lines of battle and delivering lead downrange here. So they were facing this position, and the Confederates were coming up towards us on the camera here. Now, not all was sunshine and butterflies for the 89th. As they were arriving in this position, getting ready to fight, the 22nd Michigan, which is the monument to our front, along with the 115th Illinois, began to fall back and buckle under the Confederate onslaught in this general area. Now, Colonel Caleb Carleton ordered the regiment to lie down and allowed these broken regiments to retreat through the 89th Ohio that was positioned in this general area. Now, as the regiment was passing over them, Carleton would be constantly saying to his men, "Steady, steady, steady," steadying the regiment so they too, in turn, would not flee this area. So, despite having little combat experience, Colonel Caleb Carleton was performing quite well here.
For over 5 hours, we kept 3 times our number at bay, fighting them from behind trees and logs and lying down on the ground. Our ammunition began to fail at last, and we had to resort to the cartridge boxes of the slain for more. Half of our men had been killed, wounded, or fallen back to the rear. Darkness was coming on. Still, we despaired not. General Granger had been on the ground and promised to send us reinforcements. John Hill, 89th Ohio Infantry.
So I've worked my way down. Right now, we would have been facing the advance of the Confederate infantry. So they would have been coming directly at us towards the camera, making their way up to this position here. And you had the 89th, along with the rest of Granger's Reserve Corps, positioned all along here and wrapping back around. So I just wanted to show you the Confederate perspective here, and this area kind of reminds me of Culp's Hill if you've ever been there. You have a really subtle slope, but very clear fields of fire for the defenders here. Now the 89th would continue their fight here for hours, holding on against numerous Confederate attacks. Now upon nightfall, the 89th and the rest of the units in this area were running dangerously low on ammunition.
My company suffered very severely in the battle, more so than any other in the regiment. First, Lieutenant Jackson was killed instantly. Also, Joseph H. Smith, Theodore N. Vaughn, Corporal Silas Weaver, and David Morrison. There were some 8 to 10 wounded, besides, more or less severely. The company, all with perhaps 1 or 2 exceptions, did splendid, went into the action with 42 men, and came out with 19. There were perhaps 3 or 4 that escaped capture. Lieutenant Edward Scott, 89th Ohio Infantry.
Now, despite the valiant stand by the Union regiments in this general area here, it was inevitable that they were going to have to retreat. Slowly but surely, George Thomas began issuing orders for the units here on Horseshoe Ridge to pull back. But unfortunately, those orders never reached the 22nd Michigan, the 21st Ohio, and the 89th Ohio. They never received orders to pull back. Now, there's some discrepancies as to how this happened, but from what I've read, it sounds like the courier who was sent to this area to tell these regiments to pull back was killed before that message could be delivered. So I just wanted to give you one more brief overview of the area here. So right here you have the 89th. Just before us here is the 22nd Michigan. And farther down the hill here in this direction, you have the 21st Ohio. Now, it's important to remember that each of these regiments has a couple hundred men within their ranks, so their line would have stretched a couple hundred yards in either direction here. But we are in the general area of where the 89th Ohio was making their valiant stand. And again, remember, this is their first real combat, and they could have broken at any point during the numerous Confederate attacks in this area, but they didn't. They held their ground until almost nightfall, when they were running dangerously low on ammunition. All right, let's keep something in mind. Nightfall has approached. It is pitch black. We're running low on ammunition. Some of your friends may not be with you anymore, and we're holding this position, hunkering down, trying not to make noise. Down the hill, we can hear the Confederates preparing for another attack. We hear men moving in the tree line here, attempting to flank our position, but there's nothing we can do. It's just 3 regiments here, and we got left behind. Think about what's going through the minds of an individual soldier, either in the 89th Ohio, the 21st Ohio, or the 22nd Michigan. Think about that. They were left behind, and they know another Confederate attack is coming, and they can't defend against it. Now, that Confederate attack came come nightfall here. So you had Colonel John Kelly's brigade and Colonel Robert Triggs' brigade began to advance on this area in the pitch black. Now, Triggs' brigade would advance around this direction here and come up from behind the Union infantry regiments on Horseshoe Ridge here. So they would attack from this general area behind us, and panning back to my left, you had the other Confederate attack unfolding to our front. And honestly, this last attack here, it was over within seconds once the Confederates were within pretty much point blank range. The 89th Ohio and the 22nd Michigan, along with the 21st Ohio, pretty much surrendered immediately, not wanting to risk unnecessary death. Now, as members of the 89th were surrendering to the Confederate brigades to our front, a friendly fire incident occurred. Remember, this area is pitch black. One of the regiments from behind us here let loose a volley into members of the 89th and members of the fellow Confederate brigade in this area, and a few men would be dropped. Now, obviously, once this volley was let loose, they understood that they now opened fire on their own men. But again, just another snapshot of night fighting in the American Civil War was no joke.
Soon after dark, the rebels, knowing we were there, so disposed their forces as to open fire and charge us from 3 sides, having a brigade on the 4th or front to renew the attack while the others closed in and surrounded us, and thus we were sacrificed to save the other part of the army and prevent a complete rout of our whole line and the rebel occupation of Chattanooga. Captain David M. Barrett, 89th Ohio Infantry.
All right, so this episode is a little more personal to me. And it's personal to me because my buddy Dustin actually had an ancestor fighting in the 89th Ohio here at Horseshoe Ridge, and he was one of the few members to actually make it out of here to fight another day. So we're going to have Dustin share some thoughts about being in the very spot that his ancestor fought for and survived. All right, so here is the monument to the 89th Ohio Infantry. And Dustin, what's kind of going through your mind here? I know you've wanted to come here for a while, and we're finally here, so want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, it's a little surreal. Just a little bit over a year ago, I didn't even realize I had an ancestor who fought in the Civil War, and luckily I was able to find out that I did. And once I did, I obviously wanted to come here. And you know, now being here, just walking up here, I got the chills. Kind of have chills now just thinking about it, and looking at the area and just seeing what they went through, and knowing that my ancestor was one of the few that was able to make it out of here unscathed. It's kind of amazing, because obviously without that, I wouldn't be here. So glad I had the opportunity to come out here. Yeah, I think being here, it gives me a little bit of perspective of maybe what he went through, knowing that it's, you know, mid to late afternoon, slowly becoming dark. You know, you run out of ammo, and just seeing here up on this ridge, it feels like you might be safe, but I mean, with no ammo and just a few guys isolated from the rest of your army, and knowing that there's a Confederate attack coming, it does put things into perspective, and I can kind of get a sense of they're probably scared and at that point, and just wanted to make it out alive.
So once the Confederates enveloped this area, the bulk of the 89th Ohio, the 21st Ohio, and the 22nd Michigan were captured here on Snodgrass Hill. Now, with the exception of a few men that were able to escape and 93 others who were detailed to guard our wagon train, the entirety of the 89th Ohio was killed, wounded, or captured, fighting here on Horseshoe Ridge.
We advanced, slowly repeating, "Surrender, boys, we've got you." Our opponents finally began lowering their guns, which we took and threw behind us. Then at once we became friends and began a frenzied trading of tobacco for coffee. Private James M. Weiser, 54th Virginia Infantry.
We then proceeded to the top of the hill within 50 yards of them and halted and took 30 prisoners. They tried to escape by running, but they ran into the 6th Florida and were all captured. Robert Watson, 7th Florida Infantry.
Okay, now that was a pretty cool experience. I've got to see a lot of great battlefields, learn about a lot of great stories, but this was the first time that I was able to bring someone to a battlefield who had a direct ancestor fighting here. And me and Dustin have been kind of talking for a while to make this happen, and we finally did. So it's a pretty cool moment. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you learned a little bit about the 89th, because I certainly did, especially with talking with Dustin. And we're going to catch you on the next one.